Vive la homeward sailor, vive la homeward sailor, vive la homeward sailor.
Welcome back to the Seth and Chris Show. Happy Friday. Give us a call, 602-508-0960. We'll be taking your calls all day. And one call I really want to take is this one. It's Brandon Weichert, who we promised in the last segment would be joining us. Brandon, how are you?
I'm okay, Chris. How you doing?
Doing very, very well. Thanks for coming on the show, Brandon. You've been a busy beaver this week. Have you been writing with two keyboards or just with one?
Well, yeah, I've been on fire right now because there's a lot going on, and also I've been at my website following the French election very closely. So I've also been pumping out articles there. But I'm having a good time. So
talk to me about the French election. This is the vote is what, Sunday?
Yes, on the 7th. Yes.
Right. That's the French for you, violating the Sabbath in order to put politics above the church.
That's right. That's right.
that's what the French Revolution was all about.
That's right. And they say that Catholicism is coming back in France, but I don't know.
So what do you think? Just give us kind of the 50,000-foot view of the French election, 25 and 10.
Well, so basically we've got the Emmanuel Macron is the kind of Hillary Clinton of this French election. He's the closest thing. He's approximate to her. Very milquetoast, status quo. He's much more inexperienced than she, but he's pretty much an agent of the status quo, pro-Euro, pro-EU, pro, the pro-open borders, all the things that the French people are very much, many of them are very much opposed to, particularly in the countryside.
I kind of think of him almost more like the Obama, though, Brandon. He's young, he's inexperienced,
sure.
He went to all the right schools, and he
sure.
is an ardent globalist.
That's true, and that's a fair point, and either way, it's bad for France, I would say. On the other hand, though, you have Marine Le Pen, who, of course, she's considered far right there. I think that she's good for France. Unfortunately, though, anybody who monitors this stuff will tell you that National Front and Marine Le Pen, but really her party, has some questionable contacts and questionable love for Russia. Now, I'm not one of these who believes that the Russians were responsible for Trump, but there is verifiable proof that there is a sympathy, and it's not just her; it's also on the left in France.
But here's the what I hear people say that, and I'm sure I do believe that what you say is true. I mean, I think the evidence is out there that there is some type of relationship between the National Front and let's just say the Putin wing in Russia, just broadly speaking. So what?
Right,
that's always my comment. So what?
The only thing, is the problem for American foreign policy, where it complicates things, at least for now, is we don't know how a Moscow, Berlin, Paris condominium will act. The only really instance of that happening was in the run-up to the Iraq War. Now, you and I are in agreement that the Iraq War was a disaster, but the fact is that the French and the Germans, with the Russians behind them, did more damage to American global standing than any of our enemies did in the last 20 years. So the only concern is with the French and Germans, with the economic, particularly of Germany, potentially aligning with Russia, that could start to complicate our international stance. Now,
in what sense? In what sense, Brandon?
Well, if we're trying to, first of all, let me just say, I think that Marine Le Pen is a nationalist, so she may be buddy-buddy with Putin for now, but Trump can make her a better deal because we're their number one trading partner, France. So let me just put that out there. And in point two, for now, a Moscow, Berlin, Paris condominium threatens us because of the fact that all of our foreign policy is oriented toward having a continental Europe that is oriented toward the Atlantic, the Atlanticist powers. We don't really know. I think the fear is that we don't really know how this is going to pan out, other than to say that our Eastern European friends, particularly Poland, which is a vital country, do not want a Berlin, Moscow, Paris axis forming. They view that as a threat. And I would hate to say it, but the Kremlin, they're not our friends. They're not our enemies per se, but I'm a little concerned, a little uncomfortable with just saying, so what? But I agree. I don't think Le Pen is a Russian stooge per se, and I think that Trump could make her a better deal. I think she's a nationalist. National interests are what's important.
That's what I think. That's exactly right. And this is not unusual in post-war French history for them to have relations with Russia that were anxiety causing. Let's put it that way for the United States. We're going to go to a break here. This was a short segment, Brandon. Stick with me. We'll come back. I want to pick up on this exact point. Brandon Weichert's our guest. We'll be right back with more of the Seth and Chris Show. Welcome back to the Seth and Chris Show. Got Brandon Weichert on the line. Brandon is a national security expert explaining what is going on in France. That's what we've been asking since about 1787 in this country, Brandon, or thereabouts. But there's a big election coming up in France. We've got Emmanuel Macron. He is the globalist candidate. And we have Marine Le Pen, who is the nationalist candidate. She is the one candidate in the French election who is pro-France. Brandon?
An article on my website about this, and basically, look, if you're a French, and I've had the luxury of, in the last 2 weeks, speaking to several French people here in the D.C. metro area. One in particular is pretty well known in this area. This is off the record, so I'm not going to say who it was, but he told me point blank, he said, I fled France 10 years ago. He goes, we were losing the country. He said, typical French, he goes, I don't like any of the candidates. He said, but I got to tell you, Marine Le Pen, we need a radical solution, and Marine Le Pen is going to be the best one, I think, for the country. And that was the key. It's for the country. That's what this whole spate of elections is about, whether it's on the left or the right. In these populist movements, it's about putting national interest first. It is democratic globalism versus nationalistic populism. And I think you know where I stand, and I think that Le Pen, I know a lot of the experts are saying, no, she's got a ceiling of 40%. Ian Bremmer said that recently. I like Ian a lot, or Mr. Bremmer, I like Bremmer a lot, but I got to tell you, I think it's closer to 60 to 70%. I think that she's got a lot of quiet support out there, just like Trump, just like Brexit. They're not going to the pollsters and saying we support her, but when it comes down to it, they're going to vote for her because she's the only one saying that I want to make France for the French, not France for the world.
Brandon, here is there was a poll out this morning. It was linked on Drudge. You may have seen it, that showed Macron up 24. I don't know what to make of that. I mean, it's hard enough knowing what to make of polls here in America, where we live it and breathe it every day. What's your take on where that election stands?
So here's the thing. As I wrote on my website, I try to be as
Feel free to plug it. By the way, Brandon.
Okay, thank you.
You've been hinting around enough. We get it. You want to plug the website?
Well, I just because I've been working very hard on the French stuff, and it's the Weichert Report. It's WEICHERT report.com, and basically the thing working against Le Pen, unlike in the U.S., is that French polling has been notoriously accurate. So that is the only thing I will say to people who are saying she doesn't stand a chance. They're probably right if you're going off of trends from the polling. Yeah, the polling has been, but the thing is, that's not the only poll out there. And there was a poll, about 3 or 4 days ago, and I know that it's 3 or 4 days old at this point, but that showed that he was slipping. And the thing is, I really just, I think there's a trend among people, whether it's in America or Britain or Europe, where they don't want to have to be telling pollsters what they think. They're just going to, when it comes down to it, they're going to walk into the polling booth. They're going to pull the lever for the candidate they really want.
Right. This is something we call here the Bradley effect.
Yes.
Right.
Yes,
which is, what you just described is people, for whatever reason, not wanting to talk to pollsters and tell them the truth about who they're going to vote for.
Right.
What's your do you think that there is a meaningful amount of that going on in France? In other words, is there a chunk of France that maybe like the 2016 election here? Is there a chunk that of the population that is pro Le Pen, pro France, maybe hasn't voted in large numbers in the past, is going to come out in a bigger wave this time?
Well, I certainly think that the people who are pro-nationalist in France are more galvanized than the democratic globalists are. The same person I talked to who was from France out here in D.C., he was from the countryside originally, and he had also lived in Paris, but he said, one thing that he said is that, look, he said, I know for a fact people back home who do not like Le Pen, they don't like Macron either, and they're just not going to go vote. And he and I were both of the mind that, well, then that works in Le Pen's favor.
Right, because, right. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, because her supporters are galvanized. And if you look at the map, Bloomberg actually has been doing a really good job for a mainstream media network covering the kind of trends that are going on. When Le Pen ran in 2012, she had hardly any support on a national level. But if you look at the map of France, the electoral map, her support has skyrocketed. So even if the experts are right on this one, and she does end up losing, the real fear among the French elite is that it's going to be Le Pen 2022 in their next election cycle, because if trends persist, even if she loses this time, which I think she's got a 60% chance of winning, even if she loses, though, and Emmanuel Macron wins, come 2022, the trends in France are going to be even worse in terms of the globalists. Everything's going to be going south there big time. And that's going to work in her favor, and I have a feeling she will run again. And, the third time's the charm, as Reagan proved. So I do think, though, I do think that her supporters are more galvanized, and they are growing in number, and the supporters of Macron are really not supporters of him. They're just kind of against Le Pen, and that's not enough to galvanize, as we've seen with Brexit and with Trump. That's not enough to galvanize people into voting against the more quote-unquote popular candidate.
Brandon, what % of the vote did Marine Le Pen get in 2012?
You know what? It's in my article, and for the life of me, I cannot remember. It was, I don't think it was above 20%. I cannot remember that off the top.
And what? So 20-ish, right? Okay. I mean,
I think it was low. I mean, obviously not enough to, she didn't make it. But if you look at the map, you look at the way people are coming in for supporting her, she went from having a small section of the southern portion of the country. I think it was only 2 or 3 apartments, which is what they call their city, their areas, their counties. She now has it's exploded up. It's all the way up into the northern part of the country, outside of the cities. So it has just been in 4 years or 5 years. It has been exponential because the trends of immigration and depressed economics are working against the supporters of democratic globalists. And so that's if he wins, if Macron wins in 2022, I have a feeling that she definitely will win, because it's not going to get better over there if they keep doing the same thing that they've been doing for the last 30, 40 years.
So if let's say she loses, for the sake of argument, sure. Let's say she comes with 40-ish%. What's the impact of that on France, on French politics?
Yeah, well, it's going to be basically what we've seen. Well, first of all, I think there will be civil unrest, regardless of who wins this election, from different quarters, obviously. But there will be problems there. In fact, I know French intelligence and their security services are apoplectic right now about the day after the election.
Because those anti-fascists are so peaceful, right?
Yes, yes, exactly. I don't. I would say that it's going to be the same old. The same leftist statist politics, the democratic globalism. Things will continue to decline there. It'll only get good for the very well educated and the people who are involved in tech sectors in the cities. And everybody else is going to keep suffering. Immigration will continue unabated. You're going to have basically Eurabia. The whole Eurabia thesis is actually becoming a reality potentially now.
Brandon, we're going to go to a break. Stick with me, because when we come back, I want to talk to you about what this means for America. How does the French election, the French presidential election, impact American politics and American policy? Brandon Weichert's our guest. We'll be right back with more of the Seth and Chris Show. Welcome back to the Seth and Chris Show. Got Brandon Weichert on the line. He is the author, proprietor, and I imagine that that means chief cook and bottle washer of the Weichert Report as well. Right? You get all the glamour. That means you also get all the dirty jobs.
That's right. That's right. Yes, it's very true right now. Yes, I am a small, very small operation, but I think I'm making a bit of an outsized impact right now. So
you're punching above your weight. That's what we like. Yes. Punching above your weight. Brandon, thanks for sticking with me. I want to ask you this. So the French election is to me is fascinating, and I hope it is for everybody else too, because France it's France, right? This is the heart of the of all things globalist, right? It was really the French who have pushed the EU forward. Germany, of course, has become sort of the hegemon within the EU, but this is so much of this is French ideology, it's French philosophy, it's French politics worked out en masse across all of Europe, and now we see the French deciding, at least a chunk of the French thinking, you know what, actually we like being French.
Right. Yeah. Well, again, it's the same thing we've seen this entire pattern washing at least across the Western world. Is at some point people woke up to the fact that the promises of economic opportunity and easier living, and the promises of that globalism gave, was not exactly what they advertised it as, and that there's actually a trend forming in terms of the economy where we're killing the middle class in each of these countries and replacing it with a very creative, high-tech class of 15% of the population, and then the rest of the population are, mired in the service industry. And so we're actually kind of going back to feudalism.
Yeah, I call it the plantation economy.
Yes. And so it's frightful. I was just talking actually with Ben Weichert, and he was talking about home prices in California. And I said, well, out here in Alexandria, in the neighborhood where I'm living in, I was driving down the road, and a split level that hasn't been touched in 50 years is going on the market for $949,000. Why? It's part of this whole system of the middle class being slowly squeezed, to extinction. And so that is in play in France. And in the report that I did, I got into the French education system and how the 72% of French most French hold a high school diploma. However, when it gets into the college level, it's so difficult to achieve educational status there because it's all test oriented, and then also it's so hierarchical there, and they're becoming so fixated on education.
Right. The French system is actually the worst of all worlds. I mean, it is. We talk about the elite universities here in France. There's only a few schools. If you go to one of those, you're set for life. Right. It matters. If you go anyplace else, it does not matter at all. It's really a bifurcated, sort of binary system in education in France. We don't want that to happen here. Right. Anyway, Brandon, we're going to go to our top of the hour break. We'll come back with more of Brandon Weichert. We'll move on from France. We've got a bunch of other stuff to talk about. More with Brandon after this.
Seth Leibson, Chris Buskirk. It's principles and politics. The Seth and Chris Show is on now.
Welcome back to the Seth and Chris Show, penultimate hour of the ultimate show of the week, joined by Brandon Weichert, who is calling us from, I guess we'll call it the swamp. Brandon is also the Weichert. You put the Weichert in the Weichert Report. Well, the Weichert Report, is it theweichertreport.com or just Weichert?
It's either. If you type in Weichert Report or the Weichert Report, it takes you to the website. Either way, I have both domains.
We spent quite a bit of time in the last hour, Brandon, talking about France and the French election. You're quite an expert on these issues, so maybe you know the answer. Do you know why the French have so many civil wars?
Uh,
So maybe they can win one.
That's kind of like that's funny. That's funny. There's an old joke. Why are there so many trees lining the streets of Berlin? Because I'm not in the streets of Paris because the Germans like to march in the shade.
Right, exactly. Yeah, or the another one. As long as we're doing French jokes this hour, which is kind of funny since we're broadly supportive of Marine Le Pen.
Yes, yes.
But nonetheless, yeah, the sale of French rifles from the army, yes, only dropped once. I'm glad you think that's funny. I do too. I want one last thing on France, and then we do have to move on because you've written what I think is the best article I've seen so far on how to understand the healthcare bill in France. Tell me a little bit what your understanding is about the so-called no-go zones, where that have sort of become these mini Sharia states within France.
Well, I think it's an example of what happens when you let cultural Marxism run a society.
Well, before we even go there,
okay.
Let's talk about you accept that it is a fact, right? This is something that people like Emmanuel Macron would dispute, say, there's no such thing as a no-go zone. There are no mini Islamist states within France.
Yeah, I know for a fact that they exist. The police there, they don't patrol, and in fact, it became an issue when the big attack, not the Charlie Hebdo attack, the other one that happened in Paris, the Bataclan, the nightclub attacks. There was a big problem because the French police traced one of the shooters was living in this no-go zone, if I remember correctly. It was one of the attacks. There's been so many, and they had to wait to go in because they didn't have a presence because they didn't patrol there routinely because they didn't want to get killed. The French police didn't want to get killed on a daily basis because of the fact that these were no-go zones. It was literally little, parts of Pakistan or Saudi Arabia or whatever, in Paris. And it's not just Paris, by the way. There's a handful of other cities that have these no-go zones. Like I said, I have a lot of friends. In fact, on my website, I reproduce. I'm friends with some of the professors at St. Cyrs, the famous military academy there, and they will send articles for me to publish in English that they write in French, and they will be the first to tell you that a lot of this is an absolute truth, and the French government will never admit it because of the political correct nature of the system there.
And what's the understanding of the people on the ground of the French people? They know that it happens, but that's 2 arrondissements over, so I don't want to think about it.
Yeah, it's that typical French, let them eat, cake. If I can be cliched here. The people in the cities, there's a core contingent that really are disgusted by it. But there are particularly young people in the cities where these no-go zones exist. They're just like, it's life. It's just the new norm, and we have to have armed soldiers patrolling our streets now because, we don't want to do anything about fighting terrorism properly. So we're going to basically curb our constitutional freedoms and our civil liberties in order to make everybody feel equal. And so in the countryside, it's very different. The countryside is where, the heart of, old France is, and they're saying this is wrong. This is very wrong. And this has been a, traditional divide in France going back to Napoleon. Remember, Napoleon...
That's right, yeah.
There was the countryside that was very much in favor of Napoleon because they said the Parisians with Robespierre and the guillotine were out of control. It's always the cities that are out of control.
And yet we have Macron who's saying explicitly that he wants more immigration from the Middle East. Right.
And I saw a funny article from the People's Cube in which the headline was Macron vows to create legislation to equally redistribute terror attacks throughout the EU. He is your typical French democratic globalist where he's so happy and lives in such a bubble, typical lefty bubble, that he just doesn't acknowledge it. It's not that big of a deal because he doesn't have to live next to it. He lives apart from it.
So what happens? I mean, we've got, if he wins, which seems like at least an even money bet. If you have him, if you have Macron who wants to increase immigration from the Middle East into France, you've got Merkel next door who wants to do the exact same thing, is doing the same thing in Germany. What happens? I mean, that's just, to me, seems like pouring gasoline on a fire.
Oh, well, if you take into account the last 40 years of the disturbingly declining fertility rates among native-born Europeans, especially in France and Germany, what you're going to have is not Europe. You're going to have, as crazy as it used to sound a decade ago, as theoretical as it used to sound 5 years ago, it will become a reality. Eurabia. You will have a Islamicized Europe, and then not that every Muslim going into Europe is a threat. It's that there is a core contingent of immigrants and refugees that are coming into Europe with political intentions of overturning the system there and instituting Sharia law. That's the problem. Is you have a very organized minority group of people who are going into these countries as kind of a vanguard, starting to distribute these crazy ideas. The home systems there in France and Germany and throughout Europe are so stifled by political correctness, they don't try to stop it. They actually start embracing it, and then you get more and more of these immigrants and these refugees coming over, and some of them, larger and larger groups of them, end up becoming sympathetic at the very least to this Islamic, political theology, and eventually they start outbirthing the native-born population, and before you know it, you're going to have...
Which doesn't take much, by the way, since Europeans have basically given up on reproduction.
Right. It's, again, cultural. That gets back, though, to cultural Marxism and the fact that it's all about instant gratification now. They want to have no strings attached, relationships in Europe, and, it's sad. It's literally the the suicide of an entire country. And so Le Pen's trying to stop it, and who knows? I mean, it's tough, but I think she's got a better chance than most of the experts think. But, who knows? It's really up to the French people at this point.
What happens if Le Pen wins?
If Le Pen wins, well, first of all, everybody keeps saying it's the end of the EU. No, it's the start of a reformatting of the EU into a truly German-dominated union. The EU is only going to really end the minute the Germans realize that this is not a good deal for them, and that day will come. It won't necessarily come right now, and it'll see an enlarging of Germany's control over continental Europe. Because let's face it, with all due respect to the French, France just isn't that important. It's just not. Not compared to Germany. Their economic output in France is nothing compared to Germany. And the only thing that they have going is the fact that they are such a friendly state to the West, to the U.S. and the Atlantic powers, that Russia looks at France as an ability to cleave them away and to maybe get some of the French military technology and some of the stuff that the French have been getting from the U.S. and competing with the U.S. about. So that really the big thing about France is it will be a sea change in Europe in the sense that it will really become a German-dominated EU, and France will become an ancillary player, but important player in the sense of Russia and America competing for influence with Le Pen. And within France, I think you'll have an economic revitalization, though, of the working class, because they won't be stymied anymore by these ridiculous EU policies. Look at what happened in Britain after Brexit. They had an economic resurgence there, when everybody was saying that it was going to be the end of British, economy. The same thing in America. We've had this economic resurgence here since Trump took over. And
Brandon, would not some of the other states within the EU, though, would they not leave as well? I mean, this would be death by 1,000 cuts, and maybe there would be some satellite states that kind of cleave to Germany.
No, absolutely. This is the end of the EU, but the way people have been talking is they make it sound like once France goes, I think what's going to happen is there's going to be a reformatting of the EU into maybe a northern and southern EU zone, with Germany really becoming the absolute 100% power. And eventually, though, you're right, and particularly in Eastern Europe, the minute that France goes, Poland is going to look for the exit, because they know that Russia's moving in now, and they do not want to be in an EU that is beholden to Germany, that is beholden to Russia.
Right.
So,
right. Right. Brandon, we're going to go to a break, and then we'll come back do a final segment, which I want to do all about your excellent new article entitled "To Be Puritanical or Pragmatic on Healthcare Reform." It's published at American Greatness.
Thank you.
You can find it at www.amgreatness.com. We will be right back with more Brandon Weichert. Welcome back to the Seth and Chris Show, joined by Brandon Weichert, chief everything at the Weichert Report, and a frequent contributor. I'm glad you like that, Brandon. A frequent contributor to American Greatness. You wrote today a piece entitled "To be Puritanical or Pragmatic on the Healthcare Reform Bill." Yeah, and here's just a snippet from what you wrote. You say, "I, for one, have never understood why we must repeal and replace an awful law like the Affordable Care Act," meaning Obamacare. "In fact, I hate the entire idea of replacing Obamacare. Repeal and replace was a talking point created by Republican strategists back in 2010 to get those much ballyhooed moderates to swing their votes over to the Republicans. The logic was based on the flawed assumption that no American would ever support ending an entitlement." You go on to say, "We would all do well to remember that the bill that passed the House is not the final bill," talking about the AHCA, the bill that just passed this week. "Rest assured, it is during this iterative legislative process that our leaders will hammer out a much more workable bill." Now, I know what you're thinking. This isn't a good thing because it will give the politicians more time to equivocate and to hose we, the people. So now that we know where you're coming from, what do you think about this bill? Let me start with this, just a threshold question. The original bill that Paul Ryan and the House leadership put forward 5 or 6 weeks ago, where were you on that bill? Pass it. If you're in Congress, were you a yes or a no?
The original bill, I would say I was a no.
Okay, and on the bill that passed this week?
I think that I would have been I would have been where the Freedom Caucus was, a very tepid yes. Let's get this to the next level and let's try to work this out, through the iterative process.
Yep.
Look, I write in the article, this is not a perfect bill. It's going to need work. And I worked on the Hill long enough to know, I know everybody's cynical, but I'm telling you, these congressmen respond to people calling in, to people writing letters, to people writing emails. It's old-fashioned, but it still works. It's the most important thing that if people really want the best health care bill from this, I recommend everybody call your congressman, call other congressmen who may be on the bubble, call the senators, call everybody, let it be known what you want, which is a conservative, a free market bill. And I'm telling you, though, this is the first steps. It's the necessary step, and we're going to need the people, particularly the Trump supporters, who are still, according to polls, 92% still very much in favor of Trump. We've got to get them calling. This is going to be an interactive process. It's going to be an iterative process, and it has to be the people, though, pushing this thing. Otherwise, the Congress, is going to do what they always do, which is equivocate and beg off. But this is the necessary first step. We get something going, and the core components of this bill is that it lowers costs onto the consumer. It creates competition by creating choice, and then it also gets rid of that stupid tax. There's no onerous taxes, no punitive taxes. That's the three core things that the Tea Party, that myself, that every Republican, every conservative certainly who has been running since 2010, who's been involved since 2010, has wanted in a repeal and replace bill. And it does that. So we've got the core building blocks there. We need to just keep pushing forward, and we need everybody to get involved.
Brandon, you and I are in basic agreement on this. I was very much opposed to the first bill. I was, as you say, a tepid yes on this bill. I think it was, I think it was the right political thing to do. I also think it was the right thing on a substantive basis to do for the country because it does offer an improvement over what we have and some meaningful improvement. So I'm more or less where you are on this. If I was in Congress, I would have voted yes. So just to be totally transparent on this. But later on in the show, I've got Congressman Andy Biggs coming on.
Oh,
he's a Freedom Caucus member. He was a no, and he's going to explain why he was a no. Now you argue, and I know the reasons why, but I want you to tease them out for everybody else. You say that three things: the costs. This will lead to lower costs. Costs are down. It will lead to increased choice, so choice is up, and that what you call the stupid tax. I like that. That is gone. Let's go through those one at a time. How will this bill, if it goes through, let's just say it passed through the Senate as is, if this bill, how will it lower costs?
Well, it's not going to pass the Senate as is.
Right, but just arguendo.
Let's see. Lowering taxes. Well, first of all, it's getting rid of the mandate for. I'm so sorry, not the mandate for pre-existing conditions, but it's lowering the. I'm actually. I apologize. I lost my place. What it's going to do is it's going to lower the cost on the consumers because it's going to allow you to basically pick your own plan that you want. It's not going to it's not creating the pools. There's a litany of things that it's doing in terms of diversifying and creating competition that the Affordable Care Act did not do. The Affordable Care Act was all about moving people, I believe, into a single payer. I think this is going to attempt to stop that slide. I think that Rand Paul, for instance, his problems with it in terms of it subsidizing subsidizing insurance profits. I think that there's a lot of good points that he makes, and I hope that the Senate can address these issues. But I think that, and the key issue of creating competition, creating choice, I think these are the things that the bill so far is doing. It's moving in that direction, and we cannot have no momentum here.
Right. It's moving in that direction, imperfectly though it may be. I mean, let's stipulate that. We both agree it's imperfect. It's not enough, but it is moving. It is going the direction we want it to go, correct?
Yes. And again, it requires the people to be actively engaged in communicating with their elected representatives, even if it's not senators from their state, even if it's not their congressman. That is the best way to let them know and not stop. Flood the phone lines, flood their emails. I'm telling you, I used to run the IQ system for the office I worked in. The congressmen and their staffs take that stuff very seriously.
Brandon, Brandon, under this bill, how will choice be increased? How will the consumer get more options when it comes time to buy insurance, particularly in the individual market?
Well, it's not forcing you, because what the original bill was doing, the ACA was doing, is it was not forcing you, what it was doing was it was forcing you to basically, they were raising everybody's premiums because everybody was having to jump off of their private, for instance, in Blue Cross Blue Shield of Florida, they were losing thousands of people on in their insurance scrolls because they were having to go on to the Obamacare plans. And it was causing everybody's premiums to hike up. And so what this is going to do is this is trying to prevent people being forced off their insurance plans. If you like your doctor, you can actually keep it. So that's the beginnings of this.
So what do you expect when this moves over to the Senate? What do you expect to happen in the Senate? Will there? You sound in a certain way optimistic. If voters put pressure that the bill might actually be improved, my fear is that it actually get worse.
It might. No, it might, and that's why I said I don't like this per se, but I do think that so far what we basically want is in there. We just have to kind of chisel it out. And I think that the thing is, with Republicans having the majority they do have in Congress, in the Senate, I really believe that if this becomes a groundswell, that this is going to be, from the public, this is going to be a very good bill. And people like Rand Paul are raising excellent points. And I think that we can really chisel out a very workable bill. And
Brandon, we got to leave it there.
Okay,
Thanks so
you.
much for spending the time. Have a good weekend. We'll have you back again real soon. Brandon Weichert, everybody. We will be back with Andy Biggs.